Welcome into One of One Sports. It's time for our college football week 12 analysis and takeaways. Getting started with what was the biggest game of the weekend, and this weekend, pretty easy choice. It was Georgia versus Tennessee, where Georgia was able to win 31-17. Starting off with Georgia here, I think this is probably the best the team has looked all year because of how complete a performance it was on both sides of the ball. So obviously, Georgia's had some really good performances, especially the Texas game comes to mind. But the thing with that is Carson Beck still threw 3 interceptions, and it was really the defense that won you the game. In this game, Beck played much better, the offense played much better, and the defense, a little bit of struggle early, but then shuts out Tennessee in the second half. So you got really a more well-rounded, complete, complementary performance out of this team that I think shows it's the best performance of the season. And I think probably gives the most hope to Georgia fans that this team can win a title as you've gotten all year. Because after that Ole Miss win, there was a lot of questions facing this team. They did not look good there. Carson Beck has struggled in pretty much every big game, and they responded. The defense was good, and Beck played probably his best game of the year, which you like to see at this point of the year with only 1 to 2 games left for these teams. You want to have be playing your best football right now, and it looks like Georgia might be doing that, as this was a really impressive performance out of them. Then on the Tennessee side, you start out fine. Second half just didn't really ever get anything going. Nico didn't play great. Maybe there was some injury issues there. But yeah, not a great performance from Nico, and I thought he was going to have to play really well to win a road game against Georgia. I mean, when you take into consideration that Georgia, you just broke that huge streak of the SEC wins besides Alabama. So you would have to beat them twice in a row and on the road. I thought you need a really good performance out of Nico. You didn't get that, and overall the offense in the second half just was not really there and allowed Georgia to pull away from what was a tie game at halftime. And Georgia was able to really take control in the second half. I will say Tennessee did run the ball well, and their defense, I don't think their defense played as well as it usually has this season, especially when you look at their games against how well they played against Alabama, holding them to 17 points, and just in general, when the Tennessee offense has been struggling, the defense has stepped up. So I was surprised that their defense didn't play extremely well, but the run game was still there. The passing game, though, is just not explosive enough, and is the main reason that I've had questions about Tennessee since the struggle started coming up on offense in terms of can they actually win the SEC. I think those popped up again, and now this sets up a really interesting scenario in the SEC. Tennessee and Georgia tied alongside, I believe, A&M, Ole Miss, and Alabama right now. A&M and Texas would be tied at the top. The other 4 would be tied for second. So that's really interesting and should set up a fun end to the SEC conference race because of the result of this game. Moving on, though, to college football, right and wrong. What did I get right this weekend? What did I get wrong this weekend? And on right, this is more of a long-term prediction because I actually thought I predicted LSU to win this game in my predictions video against Florida. But I said if I had full confidence that DJ Lagway would be fully healthy, I would have picked Florida. But I didn't know if he could be 100% because I wasn't even sure if he would play for sure. But he looked 100% and Florida did win. So I wasn't surprised by that at all. But this is more of a long-term right because I've been saying on LSU really since the preseason. I said they weren't a top 25 preseason team. And then if you go back and watch my LSU predictions, I predicted this 3-game losing streak they're on to Florida, Alabama, and A&M. And the only game I thought they'd get upset by Arkansas, but every other game for LSU I picked right in the preseason, right? But so when everyone was saying this was like a SEC title contender, I just really didn't believe in this team. And it's nothing against LSU. It's just when I watched this team, I didn't think they were as good as everyone else was saying. And I feel like that the past 3 weeks have really shown that. So this is more of a long-term right on what I've been saying about LSU really the whole season. I feel like they've been getting a little overhyped, and we're a team with a lot of issues that people were ignoring because they were winning some games. And now that they, have played some of the better competition and things haven't quite gone their way, we kind of see that they're not a bad team. That's not what I'm saying. but they weren't that top caliber of SEC team or playoff contender team or anything like that. And I feel like that's what I've been saying. It's finally been proven out. So that's what I was right about this weekend. On the other side, though, for wrong about BYU. And for once, I get to put them on here when I picked them. At the beginning of the year, they were on here a lot when I was picking against them a few times. But this time I picked BYU. I had started to believe in this team. I thought at home against Kansas, I thought they would be able to get a win. I know Kansas had been playing better. Just beat Iowa State pretty convincingly. The offense had looked really good, but this wasn't even an offensive battle. This was a defensive battle. BYU just couldn't really put up points. Threw an interception in the end zone that ended up hurting them a lot. And BYU had been playing with fire a little bit. Let the Utah game go down to the wire. Some people probably think Utah was robbed with the refereeing in that game, but that is what it is. They've been winning games still, and I thought this team just wins. Maybe they don't have the most talent, but this team's just finding ways to win games. Seems like the luck finally ran out and Kansas was able to defeat them. That's what I was wrong about, and now this sets up, like the Georgia-Tennessee game, a fun end to the Big 12 season, because we're going to get BYU ASU next week. That in all likelihood the winner of that game is going to the Big 12 title. It sets up Colorado really nicely as well. And overall, just a fun end to the season in the Big 12. And also, on the Colorado side, though, you got to look out for Kansas. You got Kansas coming. They just knocked off Iowa State. They just knocked off BYU. They're just out here ruining people's seasons. So, Colorado's got to look out for Kansas next week. But, moving on, we have our most surprising team of the weekend. And, Kansas was in competition here. But I'd already talked about them a little bit. But the team I was actually most surprised by was the Stanford Cardinal, defeating Louisville 38-35. This game was not on my radar at all. Louisville is a team that I had ranked relatively highly. The committee did as well. And all their losses have been competitive to really good teams. SMU, Miami, Notre Dame, all I had is like either playoff teams or borderline playoff teams. I think last week I had them all as playoff teams, yeah. And those were all Louisville's losses, and they were all competitive games. And so I did not see this Stanford team, who had been really bad, beating Louisville. And this just shocked me, especially because this is one of like the main games I was watching, focusing on. And Louisville's up 35-21. I'm just assuming the game's over. And then to see Stanford was able to close a 17-0 run and win the game on a walk-off field goal, this was pretty shocking to me. It doesn't have Louisville wasn't really going to have any chance left of making the playoff or winning the ACC. So it's not huge in those regards. But nonetheless, I was, pretty shocked that they lost to Stanford. Our most impressive team from the weekend, though, it was the Arizona State Sun Devils. I thought on the road at Kansas State was going to be too much for them. Really, I know they'd gone on the road this year, but they hadn't played a ton of really tough competition. Maybe their toughest road game was at Texas Tech, and they lost that game. Or maybe at Cincinnati, and they lost that game. And now you're going on the road against a team I thought was better than both those teams. Your running back, who is your best player, Scatabo, he played, but there were health concerns coming in. He looked good, though. And then, freshman quarterback on the road, and what was really a big game in terms of keeping your playoff ambitions alive. And they just came out hot, 21-0. To start the game. You win it 24-14. Really dominated Kansas State. Kansas State couldn't really cover their receivers. Couldn't really get anything going on offensively. Avery Johnson was not great. And overall, their defense was good. Their offense was good. And, just dominated a Kansas State team that I thought was going to win this game. And I thought was probably a better team than Arizona State. And at least last night, it did not look like they were. And I was really impressed by ASU. So impressed that I made them my most impressive team of the weekend. But yeah, like I mentioned in the BYU, when I was wrong about BYU, ASU is going to get a chance at home against BYU next weekend. You win that game. All you got to do is beat your rival Arizona, who's not been playing well this season. And then you're in the Big 12 title with a chance to go to the college football playoff, which is crazy to be saying about ASU. You told me that coming to the season, I'd be like, you're crazy. They were terrible last year. I thought they'd be probably a 4 or 5 win team this year. And now they have a realistic chance of making the college football playoff. Wild stuff there. Congrats to Coach Kenny Dillingham and what he's already done turning around that program. Now we can move on to our college football playoff looking, and just like before anyone goes crazy, this is not a projection of what I think the college football playoff will end up being. This is not what I think the committee will do either. This is how I would rank the teams right now if I had to make the playoff, but there are some rules, right? The 4 conference champions, you have to be leading your conference, and then if there's a tie, I go with who I would rank as the higher team. So, with that being said, this is what my bracket would look like. I have Oregon at 1. I don't think that's controversial. Now, I know this is controversial. BYU, SMU, and Texas all have 1 loss. SMU's obviously stuck behind BYU because they lost. And SMU I would have ranked ahead of Miami because I think they have slightly better wins and then a slightly better loss, right? So I would go SMU ahead of Miami, so they get the ACC spot. As far as Texas versus BYU, though, BYU is the Kansas State win and the SMU win, which is pretty good. And then Texas has like the Vanderbilt win, maybe the Arkansas win or the Michigan win, so not great. Both have 1 loss, and I just don't think Texas has the strength of schedule. But the thing here is, if Georgia, because I don't think Texas is going to win the SEC, or they're not, at least they're not the team I would rank the highest out of the SEC. Like, I would have Ole Miss, Georgia, and Alabama and Tennessee probably ranked ahead of Texas. I know they have 2 losses, but if you ask me to rank these teams, when you take into account strength of schedule, I think those SEC teams belong ahead of Texas. And any of those teams, like Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee, or Alabama, would be in the 2 spot ahead of BYU. And then you could drop BYU and SMU, though, down. But because it's between Texas and Texas A&M, A&M's not a team I would have in the playoff right now, as you can see. Texas would be probably in the Alabama spot, and everyone else would move up. So that's the reason the SEC team conference champions at 4 here. For 5, I got Ohio State. Don't think that's too controversial. 6, Indiana. We'll get to see them play next week if you disagree with how those teams are ranked. But I'm pretty sure most people have them 5, 6 right now. 7, I have Boise State because the Oregon loss, like, again, that's just the same thing with Ohio State, where you're not getting punished for losing to Oregon. You have a road win against UNLV, which continues to be a good win. And you have the Washington State win, which did take a little bit of a hit. So maybe I could like, if you wanted to argue Notre Dame ahead of Boise State, I'd be cool with that. It's just the Northern Illinois loss really sticks out to me. But Notre Dame, you do have the A&M win, the Louisville win. So if you wanted to go Notre Dame ahead of Boise State, I'm cool with that. Then I have just this line of SEC teams. I have Ole Miss ahead of Georgia because they just beat them. Georgia ahead of Tennessee because they just beat them. And Tennessee ahead of Alabama because of head-to-head. Now, Alabama, I feel if you're out Alabama fan, probably not happy about this because you beat Georgia, but you got stuck 2 spots behind them. It's really, for me, it was just Alabama's win was the longest to go. And since then, Tennessee beat Alabama. I went off the most recent results just because at this point with Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama, you've all beaten each other. So you can rank them really any way you wanted. I went with most recent result. Just missed the cut here were Miami and Penn State. And Texas A&M, those probably 13, 14, and 15. Probably go Miami 13, Penn State 14, A&M 15. That's my bubble teams right now. If I was to project a little bit, I still think Miami's going to win the ACC. Don't think SMU. I feel like SMU probably won't make the playoff. I don't think BYU's going to win the Big 12 right now. And I think one of these 2-loss SEC teams that gets in will win the SEC championship. So that's a little bit of projection on my part. Now, as far as other notable games from the weekend, Clemson was able to beat Pitt in what was a really exciting game. For a while, it looked like Clemson was in complete control, and then their offense just did nothing in the second half. Pitt's able to come back from double-digit deficit, take the lead actually 2017, and Cade Klubnik's able to break a 50-yard run when Clemson gets the ball back, no timeouts, breaks a 50-yard run for a touchdown, gives them the lead, and then the Clemson defense is able to stop Pitt, win it 24-20. They stay alive in the ACC championship race, need either SMU or Miami to slip up in these final couple weeks. They're done in conference play with just the 1 loss to Louisville. And Clemson, I'm a bit disappointed in because once they started playing good teams again, they just haven't looked like a playoff level team. Then Oregon, nearly upset by Wisconsin, but is able to come back, win it 16-13. I expected this game to be pretty close, maybe not as close as it was, just because Oregon you have the super late bye week finally coming this next week, and Wisconsin was way more rested. Oregon been playing forever and was still undefeated. I expected them to have like a tight game on the road in Wisconsin, a tough environment. So I wasn't shocked by that, but it was good that I was more so. I didn't think their offense would get, kind of stifled the way it did. And they moved the ball. They just weren't really finishing drives. So I guess there's that. But yeah, they stay undefeated, and that's really all they need to do at this point. Then South Carolina over Missouri was a really exciting game. Brady Cook actually played, which was good because it made for a much more entertaining and much more competitive game than I think we would have got from Drew Pine. The Missouri receivers were making plays, and it looked like Missouri's so close to pulling off the win here, taking the lead 30-27 with just like a minute to 2 minutes left in the game. Maybe it was a minute and a half, and the defense can't get the stop. Absolutely heartbreaking if you're a Missouri fan, because if you win that game, based on what you got left on your schedule, you could easily finish 10-2. That gives you a chance of making the SEC title. That gives you a chance of making the playoff, and it's all gone because the defense couldn't get this stop on South Carolina. And then South Carolina, another good win for them, and that just shows the tight margins of the sport. Like if South Carolina had beaten LSU early in the season or Alabama, two of those losses that were super close, they'd be right in the mix of the SEC race and the playoff race. So that's just how this sport goes. And then three more notable games. Texas was able to beat Arkansas. Again, the margins of this sport. Arkansas cuts it 13-10. You force a fumble on the running back when he's breaking a run, don't recover, and then Texas able to score, and then they force a fumble on you that they do recover. It's 20-10 and the game's over. But again, Texas, a little bit of a struggle here against a team that's, probably a mediocre level team, still no great wins, so that's still, I'm not really sold on Texas yet in this season. Then Colorado beats Utah. Pretty impressive win there. The offense looked good. And Colorado, like we mentioned a couple times throughout the video, and people I'm sure you've seen, you beat Kansas, you beat Oklahoma State, and you're playing for a spot in the playoff. And then Tulane beat Navy, which I point out just because I think Tulane and Army, there's a chance they could, like if Boise State drops one, Tulane and Army are lurking to steal that spot. Tulane's only losses are to Kansas State in a game that I think they probably should have at least gone to overtime in, maybe won. I thought the referee at the end of the game was really, really bad. Then Army's still undefeated, and Army and Tulane are going to play in the conference championship. The winner of that will get, a solid win. And if Boise State drops one, I could see them jumping them. And Tulane's been rolling since those Kansas State and Oklahoma loss. So I just thought I'd point it out. 35-0 over Navy. Looks pretty good. If Army can beat Notre Dame this weekend, that's a huge one to see if the American can get a boost and get one of their teams in the playoff, maybe over the Mountain West. Finally, our biggest takeaways from the weekend. Number 3, the Big 12 is only going to get one playoff team because either BYU is going to win the conference at one loss and they'll be the only one in, or BYU is going to lose a second game and the committee will leave them out. That's really what I see happening. I don't see any way they're getting 2 teams in at this point in the season. Next, at number 2, the group of 5 team may get a bye in the college football playoff. I think when you're looking at it, there's a decent chance that BYU is not going to be the team out of the Big 12. And if it is a Colorado or an Arizona State at 2 loss, I think there's a very good chance that a 1-loss Boise State or maybe even an undefeated Army, whoever gets that group of 5 bid, is ranked ahead of them and would get that 4 seed in the college football playoff over the Big 12 team, which would be really interesting to see. And I actually predicted this kind of thing playing out in the preseason, but I thought it would be Tulane getting the group of 5 bid and the 4 seed. But yeah, it looks like that might actually be a real scenario where the group of 5 team is getting a bye in the first round of college football playoff. One thing that this could set up is potentially if the group of 5 team, isn't as good as, a lot of people probably think, then that whoever gets that 5 seed, maybe in Ohio State or Indiana, suddenly like a more favorable path in the college football playoff. So that's interesting to see. And then number 1, the SEC will control the college football playoff bubble. because now that we have Ole Miss, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, and A&M at 2 losses, with Texas still at the 1 loss, especially if A&M beats Texas, then the committee's there's gonna be a lot of SEC teams put in the playoff. I don't agree with that on a lot of them. I have a question about Texas and Texas A&M, but with what the precedent the committee set and how these games are playing out in the SEC and how tight it's gonna be, it seems like the college football playoff bubble will be taken over by the SEC. But those are my biggest takeaways from the college football weekend. Make sure to leave in the comments below what are your biggest takeaways, what do you like about the weekend, and how do you see the rest of the season playing out in terms of the college football playoff. I thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe. Until next time.